Especially in the past 5 years and with the state of the world as it is right now, more and more people are turning to knitting according to the Craft Yarn Council. And yes, there are actual statistics on this. But let's go ahead and break down why knitting improves our mental health. I think for a lot of us who knit and crochet and do handcrafts, it's really obvious that knitting improves our mental health because we feel nice and we feel good when we knit, obviously. So otherwise we wouldn't do it. But before I started looking into it, I didn't really know why it was actually making me feel good. And I kind of wanted to learn why. So let's talk about why knitting makes us feel better and why knitting improves our mental health. I know for me, I use knitting as a tool to regulate myself. When I'm feeling anxious or when I'm really stressed, I just go right to my knitting project and it really, really helps me. But I wanted to learn why does it make me feel good? So let's kind of talk about it. So when I was researching this, I found this company, this organization based in the UK called Stitch Links, and their whole entire job and mission and plan and goal is to find out scientifically why knitting feels good. And part of it's obvious, I think, to everybody who knits and crochets and does similar repetitive handcrafts, cross stitch and stuff. Part of it's really obvious. It just feels good to be repetitive and thoughtful and mindful with our movements. So knitting and crochet and cross stitch, all of these are repetitive motion activities where you can kind of regulate yourself and anticipate what's coming and just get lost in the routine of your stitches. Especially if you're working on a stockinette project or a sea of the same color of cross stitch, and you just really don't have to think too hard about it. And obviously, thinking is stressful. But my favorite part about their research study was the concept that people just don't know what relaxation even feels like until they start knitting. I can kind of relate to this. I'm an anxious little bean. And so I really, really resonated with the concept that knitting taught me how to relax and taught me what relaxation feels like. People who work in really high stress fields or people who have little kids or people who just have a lot on their plate, they're probably in a constant state of stress, in a constant state of what's next? What am I working on? And they don't have that structured routine where knitting kind of falls into that place for them. And through knitting and through crochet and through handcraft, people can learn what relaxation even feels like in the first place. And then they look forward to it and they seek it out in other areas of their life. When I was researching, I also learned about this thing called the relaxation response. And the relaxation response is basically the complete opposite of the fight or flight response that I think a lot of us are familiar with. So fight or flight is basically when you're in a really high moment of stress, whether it's real stress like you're being chased by a bear or your body's perceived stress, maybe you struggle with anxiety regulation and your body perceives stress around every corner, you will go into fight or flight response and your body will sort of either freeze, flee, or fight. And a lot of times for people who are, especially for people who are maybe more anxious, they really struggle to regulate this fight or flight response. And it happens way more often than people are probably comfortable with it happening. Nowadays, there aren't that many times in our lives for most of us that we're in immediate peril. But that doesn't necessarily resonate with our body. And our body still goes into fight or flight, making a decision at the grocery store or parallel parking. And it can be really, really stressful. And over time, that stress, that fight or flight response actually has a negative impact on the body where it can cause heart issues, stomach issues, your gut flora are highly sensitive to stress. It can cause a plethora of issues all throughout your entire body. But the opposite of the fight or flight response is relaxation response, which is, like I said, basically the complete opposite of fight or flight, where your body understands that nothing's wrong, nothing's out to get you, and you're feeling safe. Your body's flooded with positive, stress-lowering hormones, and you're just generally feeling at peace and feeling regulated. And we are responsible in ourselves for inducing the relaxation response, which is where knitters and crocheters and people who do handcrafts have an advantage. Let's talk about repetitive motion. So repetitive motion activities are exactly what it sounds like. They're activities that require the same repetitive movements, either of your whole body or of just your hands or of repetitive breathing. It requires doing the same probably small or larger movements of your body over and over and over again in identical patterns. So like with knitting, when you're knitting stockinette especially, you do the same knit stitch over and over. But this isn't just a technique that people who do handcrafts use. People who swim laps, that's a repetitive motion, right? My dad wakes up at 4:30 in the morning every single day to swim laps because he really feels like it regulates him. I know a lot of people who are outside of the handcraft community, they use repetitive motion in their everyday lives, and they may not even be aware that it's kind of soothing them. Smoking is actually also a repetitive motion activity, but I'm not suggesting you smoke. Please don't leave any weird comments. It is, though, I know people who smoke, like it calms them down. And part of the reason is because of the repetitive movement and the repetitive long, deep breaths that they take while they're smoking. So it is kind of fascinating to realize that many people use repetitive motion, maybe without being aware of it, just to regulate themselves. Repetitive motion activities work in a couple different ways to help regulate oneself and remove yourself from the fight or flight response. And one way is by entering the flow state. So again, like probably a lot of you are familiar with this feeling, even if you have not like labeled it before. You know when you've knit like inches of stockinette and you have inches more to go and you have nowhere to be and you have like a nice cup of tea next to you and you're just like vibing and relaxing and knitting over and over? That's the flow state. So people who run, when you hit that point in your run where the endorphins start coming in and you just sort of forget about your fatigue and your need for water or whatever, that's also your flow state. When you're painting and you kind of forget time and space, that's also your flow state. And flow state is one of the best ways to induce relaxation. So when you first start with your stockinette, you may feel like bored or kind of like, oh, this is like a little dry. But after a while, your brain completely forgets those feelings and you get sucked into just one more stitch, one more stitch, one more stitch. Once you get into the flow state, your brain actually relaxes. Like your body physically relaxes. There's a Harvard study that I've linked below that shows like your blood pressure lowers, your heart rate lowers, you're actually genuinely relaxed physically. Not just in your brain where you can kind of let your brain like sail away and meditate on other things and you're not like immediately focused on every stitch. It actually physically induces relaxation in the body. And that is so cool that we can literally reduce our body's issues with knitting. Repetitive motion also works because of the actual physical energy we're releasing. So when we repeat the same motion over and over at the same speed, we're releasing energy from our body like calmly and methodically and very, very purposefully. Each stitch releases the same amount of like kinetic energy. And if our brain is full of like negative energy or overwhelming energy, or we're surrounded by chaos, like I said, say you have little kids screaming, this is sort of like the exact antithesis of that energy. And it just lets your brain know, like, hey, we're feeling calm, we're releasing positive energy, we're being very intentional about the energy we're releasing, and we don't need to release energy at the same rate as our environment. And it really, really helps your brain understand, like, hey, everything's fine. You know, just because my kids are screaming and their energy is like way up here, I can keep my energy level at this same knitting pace. Whereas releasing energy like all at once, it can kind of fatigue your body and exhaust you, but releasing energy constructively and little by little, it can actually reduce like the frenetic stress energy just by that little by little pace, which is way more like beneficial physically for your body than reducing it all at once and exhausting yourself. So I've linked another study below about this, but one study I found suggests that when you engage in ritualistic behaviors, so this is like a bit more broad than just repetitive motion, right? Ritualistic behaviors can include like making your cup of coffee the exact same way every single day, which is something I do. It can include the repetitive motion that we've been talking about, but it can also include just like walking the same path to get home from work every day, or kind of following the same routine when you wake up in the morning, brush your teeth before you take a shower, or shower before you brush your teeth, like the same way every single day. It can really help our brain. So it can increase our cognitive load to follow these rituals. A lot of like, not to like get into this, but a lot of religions also use cognitive rituals and ritualistic behaviors to reduce people's cognitive load so that they are focused only on their religion. But that's like a very separate video. But yeah, so ritualistic behaviors can reduce cognitive load, meaning there's less space in our brain for anxious thoughts and frenetic energy and stress, when we're focused on following our ritual. So if that means for you that when you're getting home from work on like a Tuesday evening, you're making yourself dinner and then you're sitting down and watching the same TV show and knitting with the same flavor tea or with the same show on or knitting the same project day after day after day, you're following a ritual that your brain really craves. And you're allowing your brain to take up all of its space with that ritual and making sure it's perfected, rather than allowing your brain to be filled with stressful thoughts and other sort of stuff that's unwanted in your brain space. When we remember to do every single stitch the same way and make sure we haven't dropped any and our stitch is perfect, then we're literally reducing the space in our brain for rumination on other negative things or unwanted thoughts, and we're reducing the stress in our brain as we perfect our craft. Knitting and crochet also helps people build a mind palace, which, like, I know that sounds cheesy, but hear me out. So a mind palace is basically like a place that you go in your mind where it's safe for you and you're not overwhelmed by stress in your mind palace, and you know what's going to happen and what's coming, and you can kind of build it up to be whatever you want it to be in your brain, and you can rely on your mind palace to take you to a place of safety when you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. So for example, my mind palace is my ravelry queue. A lot of the time, like when I'm really stressed or I'm, like in a situation where I'm not sure what is the best option and I don't know what to think about, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed, I'll just sort of redirect my brain to my ravelry queue and what I'm going to make next and what colors I'm going to use. And I'm just sort of swept away by the safety of my mind palace and the safety of thinking about knitting. Because knitting is a really safe thing to think about. Nothing really goes wrong in knitting, right? Like say you make a mistake, you drop a stitch, like it's fixable. And say you are having like a really, really stressful time at work, but you just can't keep thinking about it because it's 8 o'clock and you're already home from work and you just really need to redirect your brain. You can go to knitting, you can go to your projects, you can go to what you're going to make next, what you wish you could make, what yarn you're going to use, what your friends are making, what you saw on the Ravelry Hot Right Now page. There's so many different ways that you can build your mind palace up to focus on knitting and focus on like a very safe topic that has nothing to do with the stress in your immediate environment or the stress of your job or the stress of your children or whatever stress you're going through at the time. Knitting is like a very safe topic for your mind palace. So my mind palace also has like I have a lot of plants, and so my mind palace also includes like a lot of my plants and a lot of my gardening stuff, and it's really just like a safe environment for me. Whenever I feel really overwhelmed, I just redirect my thoughts to what am I going to make next? How are my plants doing? I have a couple rehab plants that I'm always thinking about, and that way I can just know, okay, when I'm feeling really, really stressed, I can redirect my brain and I have somewhere to go. And that is a skill that you can build through your knitting practice where, you have somewhere to go when you're really, really stressed, and it can be knitting. Knitting can also provide structure where if you have a day off from work and you're feeling like sort of overwhelmed just by like the sheer fact that you have nothing to do for 10 hours, knitting can be a really helpful tool to sort of solve that because you feel productive and you feel like you're checking things off your to-do list, even if the thing is like sew buttons on the cardigan I finished. That's still a productive activity and it makes you feel good and satisfied, and finishing items provides dopamine to the brain. So one way that people can benefit their brain is by finishing stuff from their knitting projects, which is like really, it seems tiny, right? It seems insignificant, but every little bit of dopamine that you can give your brain helps. As we know, knitting is also a really positive social outlet, and finding people who share your mutual hobbies is really, really one of the best way to make friends and to sustain friendships. People who have friends who have mutual hobbies with them, their friendships are more often sustained than friends who don't share hobbies with them. But I found this study done at a hospital in the UK that showed that people who have chronic pain and were knitting in their support group for their chronic pain and for their chronic illness found that the knitting helped them to bond with the other people of their chronic pain group that they were in, as well as like reduce their pain levels that they reported. And the reason their pain levels were reduced wasn't necessarily at all because they were feeling less physical pain. But it was because, like I mentioned earlier, the cognitive load of knitting and of their knitting buddies was sort of overwhelming the cognitive load of the physical pain they were going through. So they were able to focus on their friends and their chatting and their knitting much more than the pain was sort of overwhelming their brains when they were going through the treatments alone. And they were able to rely on their social knitting network to sort of get them through the pain of the treatments they were going through, because their brain was just filled with knitting joy. And that study was done in the Royal Hospital in Bath, England. So the last thing I wanted to bring up is a little bit separate from stress, but it does, I feel like, come up like to be a really important factor in people who knit, where knitting and other sort of handcrafts and other activities like crossword puzzles or regular puzzles, they can improve your likelihood of not getting dementia and Alzheimer's. So like, I'm only 29. This isn't exactly something on like the forefront of my mind right now, but I know like as I age, I definitely plan to continue knitting for the rest of my life, because I hope that using knitting as a tool, it can kind of ward off dementia. And there are studies that I've linked below about this, where those who knit and those who do crossword puzzles and regular puzzles are much less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease as they age. And I just really think that's fascinating. So please don't stop knitting. I hope that this video was interesting, and I hope you like and subscribe.